Hello, in this video we're going to go ahead and set up our RavenDB. So first, assuming that you actually extracted the project folder to somewhere, I myself extracted to my development folder, and I actually have RavenDB already downloaded. If you haven't already done it, you can go ahead and open up a web browser. Wait for it to load. I'm recording the video, so everything is a lot slower right now. And then you can go ahead, once it loads, you can go to ravendb.net. That's, well, looks like that I have an ravendb.net. And then go to downloads, go to builds, and just scroll up to where it says production release. Just grab the latest version at the time of the recording. The latest version is from 2013, October 30th. And then go ahead and download the RavenDB client. You can download from the NuGet, or you can just, there are unstable packages, but I would recommend downloading the latest stable build. And after you download that, I have already done it into my workspace folder, and go ahead and extract it. I had a lot of people ask why I use RavenDB and why not SQL. Well, to all those people that has been asking me a lot of questions. The reason I use RavenDB for an MMO, when MMOs usually handle a lot of data at once. For example, just the player alone is going to have tons of data. It's like his social list, quests, and guild stuff, and then the stats and all that. It accumulates over time, depending on how much stuff the player has. And using an RDBMS, which is not actually designed to handle a lot of chunks of data at once, unless you have a really powerful bandwidth, which I do not have access to. So I decided to use RavenDB instead of SQL, and I did have a pretty good result with RavenDB. I haven't had any issues in the past, and it has been very fast and easy to use. So that's why I'm going to keep using RavenDB. So after you extract the RavenDB folder, go into the folder, and then go into the folder called server. This is where the server is located. There's an exe called raven.server.exe. This is actually, you can double click it to run it as a standalone app, but I do not actually prefer to run it as a standalone app, because you can actually close it, and every time you want to restart the server, every time you restart the computer, you have to manually start the server as a standalone. So I like to build it as a service. So there's an easy way to do that. You can open a command prompt by going File. I believe this feature is available in Windows 7 as well. Just go to File, click Open Command Prompt, and then type in raven.server/ install. You can do that, or if you do not have that feature, you can just go to wherever the project files are. I've attached a bat file. You go into the folder, RavenDB folder, and go to server. There's two bat files, as the name implies. One does install, and the other one does uninstall. If you edit it, same thing. Just click the cmd echo command, and then it's the same thing as we did earlier. So I would copy these two, Control C or right click, copy, and then Control V or right click, paste. I've already pasted them, and then to install it, just double click on that, and then we'll ask you to accept it. Click yes to give it permission to run. Give it some time, and the database server is up and running right now. And then we're pretty sure it has created a a folder called database. It's going to contain the system database. So to open the database, to edit it, go to a web browser again, and then go to localhost. This is where the RavenDB studio is located. But depending on where you're running the RavenDB server, may be different. If you're running in a different computer, instead of localhost, you'll type in your IP, and then the port is the same, unless you change it explicitly. So wait for it to load. Once it's server status becomes online, we can go ahead and proceed. Okay, once it opens up, since we don't have any databases, RavenDB automatically tells us to create a database. But we're not going to do that right now. Actually, we are going to do it. We need to create 4 new databases if you haven't already. So those 4s are user DB, which will contain all the user information like login, password, and stuff like that. The other one's going to be character DB, which will contain character databases, groups, social lists, and then a guild and stuff like that. And the other one will be world DB, which will contain world items like NPCs, game objects, and all worldly items, even zone stuff like gateways and stuff like that. The other one was going to be item DB, which will contain spells, items, and gears and stuff like that. So the other important thing you have to do that is to go into each databases and then import their own indexes. Because I query the database by using indexes, not by just regular link queries. If you use regular link queries, RavenDB will create the indexes on the fly. It's actually a little slow. If you don't query the same index more often, RavenDB will not cache it. But if you are going to query those indexes very often, I would recommend creating them. And that's what I did it. And I have uploaded those indexes to a Raven dump file. So if we go to the folder where we extracted all the project files, target RavenDB, go into server, go into database, and then since we have a user database open, we're going to import the user database indexes. So import this dump of user DB, click open. It's going to start importing, and it has imported 2 indexes. You can view them by going to index. So I have 2 indexes, and then go click this database, and then target the other one, which is character DB, and then go into tasks again, and then make sure you click that right. Import database. Go into character DB. Open, and we'll import all the character DB indexes in a bit. It's got 5 indexes. Same thing you're going to do with the world DB. And the world database will also import world items like NPCs, the ones that I use in my game. And then the same thing with the item DB. Okay, same thing as the world DB, item DB also contains game items and spells. And that's pretty much it. That's all we have to do to get our RavenDB up and running. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is get Photon up and running. If you haven't downloaded Photon already, I'll go open up a web browser. Wait for it to load. Wait more. And then go to Exit Games. It's doing the same thing again. ExitGames.com. And then go to Developer, download SDKs. If you haven't already created an account yet, this will be the time to do. Sign up, but I already have an account, so I'm just going to sign in using my own account. And then after you sign in, you need to grab the server SDKs. You can actually grab the exe file, which has the installation, automatic installation, but you can just grab the zip file. You can just extract it. And then if you haven't already, you need to grab the client. But I also have the, I already have the client files inside the client Unity. But if the version that I'm using is older than the version that you're going to use, I would go ahead and download the latest Photon client SDK as well. After you download that, I have already done it. It's saved it to my workspace folder. Just this is what I just downloaded, and then I'll just extract it. And then while it's extracting, you also need to grab the license. Photon comes with 20 CC if you do not have a license downloaded, but Photon offers free 100 CCU, a no expiry license. So since it's free and you get 100 CCUs, I'll just go ahead and download that, and then save it somewhere. I'm gonna save it to desktop, minimize it, and then wait for Photon to finish extracting. And after it's extracted, go into the folder where the files are extracted, go into deploy. And depending on the Windows you're running, if you're running Windows 32 version, and I'll go into that, or the same applies to Windows XP. If you're using Windows XP, you'll just go into that. Same applies to 64s. Since I'm running Windows 8 32-bit, I'll just go into there. And the first thing you need to do is get the license, cut it, and then paste it. After you do that, there's a couple more things to do. If you're familiar with Photon, yes, you need to open photonserver.config file. It's going to open up Visual Studio. Depending on what IDE you're using, it may be different, or you can just use something as simple as Notepad. But I like the editing functionality that Visual Studio offers for configuration or XML format files. So I'm just going to use Visual Studio instead. And then while it loads, just going to go into the project folder, extract it under there, and then see if it's opened up. Nope, not yet. So I already have a Photon configuration file. So if you go into project folder, go into Photon, deploy, go into it's going to be the same thing. So, and then this is my configuration file. It looks like that it has been opened. So this configuration file is mine, the one with one configuration. And this configuration is the actual Photon configuration. Do not confuse both of them. This is the actual configuration that you really need. And what are we going to do is Photon comes with two default configurations, which is default and load balancing. But we're going to add our own configuration. This is my configuration, so I'll go into my config, and then I'll just copy these. I did this by collapsing, clicking the minus arrow, so it's going to collapse the whole thing. Makes it easier for me to copy it. Just right-click, copy, or I can just click Control-C to copy, and then I'll just go to the actual Photon configuration, open up a little space, and I'll just paste it in there. And it looks like that we actually have a new configuration set up, which is MMO, and the display name, which will display in the Photon taskbar over there, which we'll see in a moment. And all the other listeners. You have the UDP listener for the master server. If you if your internet provider doesn't provide automatic port forwarding functionality, you actually have to manually set up port forwarding, but I'm not going to go into that. And then you have TCP listeners. One is for the chat server, since all the other servers can't connect to chat server, and then players cannot actually directly connect to chat servers. So that's why I have a TCP listener set up. And then you have the application defines. Basically, this lists all the applications that will be run once you using this configuration. Once you run it as a service, all of these applications are going to run. And so since we're going to run it as a service, default application doesn't matter for us. So the first application is the master, and then the things that you need to consider is the base directory, where the application is located. And the base directory is relative to the Photon folder, so it's going to be located under MMO and master. So if you look into, I have two Photon folders open. So go into the actual Photon directory and not my project directory. Go into the actual Photon directory and then target to deploy folder. We go in there, go to deploy, and then we do not have a folder called MMO. So we can't create a new folder, or I already have the folder created in my project. So what I would do, I would just copy it and then just paste it here. Since the folders are not case sensitive, you do not have to actually change the name of the folder. So wait for it to copy, and then after it's copied, if you go into there, there's a folder called master. So that's corresponds to the master server, which will be run whatever's inside the binary folder. So it's going to run the master application inside this assembly, master server.master assembly, which is right here, and it's going to run this application. If you do not really know Photon, well, this will be the time to learn it. And the other servers, the applications are chat, same thing. It's located under MMO. Try targeting the different folder. It's closest. We don't really need that anymore. And if you go into MMO, and then you have the chat, and then you have login application right there. Then you have world 1, world 2, and then I have commented world 3 and world 4. Since I'm not running world 3 and world 4, I'm only running world 1 and 2. So if you are going to run 3 and 4, I'll just uncomment them. But for now, I'm just going to comment them because I'm not going to be using world 3 and world 4. I'm only going to be using world 1 and world 2. So let's leave it like that, and then well, they will also correspond to these folders right here, world 1, world 2. They all have their own binary files. So it looks like it's all set up. Now let's see if we can run the Photon. Let's close this Visual Studio right here, and let's open up Photon. So you'll actually go into your your Photon binary folder. Depending on what version of Windows you're running, I'll just go. Since I'm running Win32, I'm going to go into Win32 folder, and then I will just run Photon control.exe. Given permission to run, wait for it to load in the taskbar, and then after that flashy thing goes away, you just right click on that, and this is, as I mentioned, this is our configuration. So MMO, you can change the name if you want, and then now you need to install it as a service. Since we're going to be running more than one application at the same time, just click OK. It's going to create a log file for us, and then click MMO, and then start service. Wait for it to load. Okay, so Photon has loaded. To make sure that it actually is working, you can just right-click on Photon on the taskbar, then click Open Log. Since I already have automatic logging set up, it looks like that I have the service is running, and then make sure the individual applications did not throw an error. So chat is working fine, the login server is working fine, and the world 1 has loaded all worldly items, and then also the world 2 has been loaded. Since I do not have anything except a doorway, I believe just one doorway, so that's the only thing that's loaded up. So it looks like Photon has indeed been loaded up. Before we set up our client, I'm going to go ahead and talk more about the server and how the servers are set up. So if you go into the project folder, go into server and Photon server, and then you will open up the solution file, the main solution file for the server. Wait for Visual Studio to load. It's going to be a little while because I have a lot of projects and I'm recording this video, so just bear with me for a moment. Okay, so it looks like Photon actually the Visual Studio has opened up. It was a while longer than I thought it was going to take. And let's just collapse all this and then just talk about the first project, which is the base project, or I would say it's a shared project between the server and the client. So since Unity 3D doesn't have 4.5, anything over 3.5, I've made the target framework to set to .NET Framework 3.5. And then one more thing to worry about is where you're actually building it. I'm actually, the output path is set to a default 30 steps backward into a folder called binary. So we are here right now. Go back, 1, 2, 3, and then it's under a folder called binary. So that's where I'm actually building the client. This is actually this one right here. This is what's actually building, but we also need to build it inside our Unity folder also. So I've set it up in the build events, which will run after each successful build. This command will run every time Visual Studio builds a successful build. Basically what it does is it's going to copy whatever's inside, whatever we built into this folder right here, which is basically where my Unity client plugin folder is located, which is a relative path. So if you go back, this is our base directory, which is, and after that you're going to go into client, Unity client, go into assets, and then it's located under plugins. So this is where we'll build. So if you're trying to build it right now, we'll also build it inside this folder as well. If your Photon, if your Unity folder is different, I'll just nuke this and then post wherever you're doing it. I don't know, C, Unity. If you're building it for that, I'll just change the path. Make sure you actually do have, because I cannot undo it. So just close that. And if you do not have any write permission, it's going to throw an exit to error. So make sure you have write permission when Visual Studio builds it. The other folder to actually worry about is the individual servers. So I have chat, login, master, and world. And first thing, you have the chat. You do the same thing. Automatically builds it to bin chat folder, and also have build events. So we need to build we need to actually copy whatever we built into our Photon folder, which is located. Just close it and reopen it again. Under wherever you extracted the project files, and then into Photon, deploy, MMO. Since my game, I have it set up in the desktop. So what I would do is I'll just open up wherever I have my folder, and then I'll just target. This is where I'm actually storing it, and then I'll just copy it, Control C. Just come here, and then I'll just change this right here, and I'll say MMO chat.bin. So it's gonna, every time I rebuild chat, it's gonna also build the solution file inside this file. So it saves you from actually copying it over and over again every time you rebuild it. So it's a neat little functionality that's available by Visual Studio. Depending on the IDE you're using, it may be different, but I'm pretty sure there's all IDE has that feature available. Same thing with login. Do the same thing with login, and then master is the same thing. Building it into a master bin, and then the world is a little different since we have, let's say, 4 worlds right here. Only 2 of them are active, the other 2 are not working, but we are still going to build it into there. So you can actually have as much copy commands as you want inside the post-build command line event. So basically, building it 4 places: world 1, world 2, world 3, and world 4. So it's going to build 4 times every time there's a successful rebuild. So that's pretty much it. And then the other one to talk about is the configuration file. If you open up the world, I have a file called game configuration. If you open that up, this is basically all the configuration, but I have not listed all the configurations here. But you can if you decide to do that. I was really lazy, so I did not list all the configurations here. And I'm just loading the rest of them via a constant file. So basically it lists 4 zones, since as you saw earlier, there are 4 worlds. You may get confused by world and zones. World is basically the zone. Actually, world is basically a container for the zone. Since I'm only allowing one world to contain 1 zone at a time, and I do not have any seamless zone transition feature available inside the server, or haven't worked on it yet, or do not have any plans at the moment. So I'm only allowing 1 zone to occupy 1 world at a time. So each zone will correspond to each of these worlds. So world 1 will have zone 1, and world 2 will have zone 2. So they have identifier, basically the same thing with the ID 1, 2, 3, 4. And they have the name, and then the Xmin and Xmax and Zmax. Basically, they are the bounds, which I'll talk more about it in a bit when we open up the client. Tile size is basically the region size. Terrain data file is where the data file is located inside the resources directory right here. If you look closely, I have a folder called resources, and I have a couple of different files in there, 5 to be exact. So I have world0.map, which contains the actual height map data of the world, and I'll talk more about it and how to generate each of those in a bit when we open up the Unity client. And then I have colliders for each zone. So zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, each have their own collider set up. And then let's go back to the same thing. So these files are relative to the resources folder. So terrain data file for zone 1 will be world0.map. And the collider for zone 1 will be zone1.colliders.xml. So you can actually have a different height map file for each zones, but I'm only using one huge zone. One huge terrain for all 4 worlds. So if you are using different worlds, so I will just change that out. It will be, I don't know, world 1, world 2, but make sure you actually have that file available here. And then you also have to right click them, go to properties, make sure it's copy to output directory set to copy if near. Otherwise, these files will not exist inside. If you go into the Photon folder, go into binary, go into resources, these won't get copied to the resources folder. The Photon's gonna throw an error if you do that. Same thing with the others. Colliders, copy if near, same thing with all the other resources. Basically, you can ask me a question: how do I know which zone corresponds to which server, which is defined inside the server config.config? And I'm temporarily using subserver ID for the zone, but you can use a different method if you want. If you can add another configuration along with this one, indicating what the current world to have a certain zone. So I'm actually using subserver ID 1, but if you right click this and go to properties, you may notice that it's set to do not copy. Since we need to actually have each different world is going to have a different subserver ID. So every time you copy that, if you remember, all of this built binaries will be copied to all these 4 folders. So if you copy this one every time, so it's gonna say every world to load zone 1. So we don't really want that. So I'm actually doing that manually. So if you go into world 2 and then open up the server config.config, it's set to 2. And then if you open world 3, so this is something you have to do manually. Or you can actually have an external script to run that every time it runs a successful build. Since this file will not change, so I'm just keeping it separately. I'm just handling it separately. So 3 right here. So just going to close that. And one more thing to talk about is the physics. So physics I'm using, as I mentioned in my videos, I'm using Digital Rune. So you have option. I have 3 available physics, but BEPU does not work right now since I did not implement it yet. Quantum is basically my implementation of the physics server, which I did not include with this update. It's basically right now, if you try to change the physics type to quantum, there will not be any physics available in the server. And then the other thing you will notice is user object. Digital Rune takes a serial number every time you initialize it. So Digital Rune gives you a free 30-day trial to try their product. So if you go open up a web browser, wait for it to load. We go into digitalrune.com. Go to downloads, and then you have an option to download a 30-day trial. Or if you want to test your product extensively and you're using it for an open source project, you can request an extended license for up to an year if you write an email to this address. That's what I'm using right now. I'm using a 1-year open source license, so I'm allowed to test their product for an year. So once you have that license code, they will send a license code to your email. They'll just paste it inside the user object, which will be used by the zone server inside the physics engine to register the license file. If you do not have a license, digital rune will not run. You cannot call any digital rune functions. So that's something to do before you actually run the server. So that's pretty much it. And next thing, we need to set up our client. So the next thing we're going to do is set up our Unity client. I will go to the wherever you extracted the project. Inside client, that's where I have the Unity client. Go into Unity and then go to assets and go to scene and then open login scene. Just give it Unity some time to load. So here we are inside Unity. So every time you will run Unity, you need to make sure that if the version you're running is different than mine, you need to make sure that you upload the map asset bundles. Since the asset bundles are heavily dependent on the Unity version you're using. If you're using a different version, and you're trying to load an asset bundle which is built for a different version, it will not load. So basically, the first thing you have to do is upload the new minimap. So go into the minimap folder, go to prefabs, select the whole thing. I will use Shift and then click the last item. So we'll select the whole segments, and then you'll go into utils, and then you'll go into export selection to map data, and then basically you'll save it inside the Unity client folder, inside the data folder, and I'll just save it at map.dat. Make sure you save it at that file, and then I'm just not going to do that because it takes a while for Unity to build it. And the other thing you have to worry about is every time you actually you build the client, you also have to copy the data folder where with the Unity file. Otherwise, it will not work as well. So if you build it to the desktop like I did right here, you also need to copy the data folder and then place it along with the build files. So that's something you have to do every time you update it to a new Unity client version. The other thing to worry about is some of the things, how to export the terrain and colliders. So go into the world under world 1. As I mentioned, I have all 4 worlds into one big chunk of terrain. So if you're using different worlds, you'll just select individually and then export them one by one. So I'm just going to select the terrain, the big terrain. Then I'll just go to utils and then I'll say export terrain. And then give it a file. So I will actually save it, since we are going to we were going to save it inside the server. Go to server, go to Photon server, then go to world. Oh, actually, I'm calling it zone. I forgot to actually rename that. Go into resources. I'll just override it over world0.map. Once you actually do that, you have to make sure that's go back into Visual Studio, right click, go to properties, and make sure it's set to copy if newer. So we'll get built to the actual Photon folder. So every time you actually rebuild that, you can actually restart Photon, or you can actually have it restarted. And the next thing we're going to do is export our colliders. So the colliders, basically, this is how it works. So if there's an active collider which is enabled, it's going to actually export it into the collider. So we'll disable region 2 and region 3 colliders. If there's anything inside region 2 and region 3, the export collider function will not export those. It will only export colliders for region 1. So it'll only have region 1 enabled. And go to utils, say export colliders. We're going to do the same thing. Go into the server, go into Photon server, go into a zone, go into resources. Since we're exporting the colliders for zone 1, I'll just select zone1.colliders.xml, and then you will save it. And then again, you have to make sure that it's set to copy if newer, so we'll get built. So you can actually have any name you want, but if you change one of these names, make sure that you actually change the name here as well, and also make sure that this is also set to copy if newer. Otherwise, we'll never know what file to import That's one of the things that you have to do every time you rebuild it or change files around and stuff like that. And that's pretty much it actually. And yeah, so if you have any bugs or errors with the project, just send me an email. This will be the last update I'll send. So good luck, everybody.